The people known as the Etruscans flourished between the Arno and the Tiber rivers in the Italian peninsula, essentially the area that is known as modern-day Tuscany. So we're really looking at this region right here. They flourish between 1000 BCE and 100 BCE, but they really peak around the 6th century BCE. No one really knows where they come from. They wrote in Greek and they spoke some Italianate languages like close to Latin, but little is known about their actual language. But we do know that both the Romans and the Greeks considered them different or other. They occupied the area known that is Rome now. They were organized in city-states, similar to the cultures that we looked at in the Near East and in Greece, but they were not as organized, which allowed the Romans to conquer them rather easily. As I said, we don't know much about the Etruscans. We think that around 1000 BCE, peoples from the Central European region, known as the Villanovans, settled in this area. We also have Greek colonies that had established themselves on the Italian peninsula. And we've already looked at Paestum here, where the Temple of Hera was built. In the 7th to 6th centuries BCE, we know that the Etruscans gained control, and they call themselves Etruria. So this is the kingdom of Etruria. By the 6th century BCE, they reach the height of their power. And the area that they inhabit, the Italian peninsula, is abundant in metal ore, and it's a very fertile area. The people here are farmers, sailors, merchants, and you can see they are in a very advantageous area for trade in the Mediterranean Sea. By the 5th century BCE, their dominance in this region begins to decline. And around this time, they start to become absorbed by the Roman Republic, which is starting to emerge in this area. And this is actually a very simplistic way of putting this. We know that Etruscans were very important within Roman society, and there are Etruscan elites that are described as being in places of power within the Roman Republic in the 5th century. But later on, they're not identified as Etruscans. So they become somewhat assimilated into the Roman Republic. But in the period of the height of their power in the 6th century, we see a very distinctive culture that is reflected in their art. We'll see that they are very much inspired by the Greeks and the Near East, but they didn't copy the Greeks the way the Romans later would. Their architecture and art is very distinctive. They assimilated styles that they saw from the Greeks and from the Near East, but they combined them to create something that is distinctly Etruscan. So here I'm showing you a typical Etruscan temple. And we only know what Etruscan temples look like because of the writings of a Roman writer named Vitruvius. Vitruvius was a Roman architect and writer who wrote a treatise on architecture in 46 BCE called 10 Books on Architecture. And in it, he describes what Etruscan temples looked like. the ones that survived still at that time. There are no remaining temples, Etruscan temples. So we look to Vitruvius to know the basic characteristics of Etruscan temples. And artists and architects have made models and drawings and plans that give us a sense of what these temples might have looked like. So according to Vitruvius, we would see a temple that was raised on a platform. Here, you see that, which is a bit like a Greek temple on a stylobate. It is accessed by a frontal staircase, a single frontal staircase, which is different from Greek temples. Once you climb the staircase, you are in a covered porch with an overhanging roof. And the walls, the side walls, are solid. So if we look at a plan, you see that it's basically a square, and half of it is taken up by the porch, and the other half has solid walls. And this one has 3 chambers or cellas, and the inside there would probably be a cult statue of a god. The temple would probably face a courtyard or a city square, so it very much had a front facade, as opposed to, say, the Parthenon, which was meant to be walked around in a procession. The roof is held up by an entablature and columns, although the place where there's a pediment, you'll notice there is an overhanging porch, but not a place for sculpture. The building materials would have been from mud brick to make the walls, and the columns and the roof would have been made with wood or volcanic rock like tufa. So this again is a big difference from the Greek temples. And just here is a quick comparison of this temple, this Etruscan temple, to the Greek temple, the Parthenon. One of the major differences, too, is, of course, the opportunities for sculptural decoration. The Parthenon, as we discussed, had sculpture in the pediment, along the friezes, both on the exterior frieze, the Doric frieze, and then the interior frieze, the Ionic frieze. In an Etruscan temple, there is no sculpture along the cornice or entablature. There is no sculpture in the pediment. Instead, there is sculpture placed on the roof line. Another major difference with the Greek temples is the treatment of the column. You'll remember that in Greek architecture, we have a very prescribed vocabulary of orders, the Doric, the Ionic, and the Corinthian order. We might see later composite orders in which an elevated column is given its own sort of base. The Etruscans used a very plain column without fluting, something that looked very much like a Doric column because it has kind of a very plain capital, but it also has a base. And you'll remember that a Doric column goes straight into the stylobate. There is no foot or base. So the Etruscans had kind of their own order that is derived from the Greeks, but again, they don't copy it exactly. They have their own style for their columns.